All right, let's do it. Good morning and welcome to the New Voices, New Rooms Author Breakfast brought to you by SIBA and NABA. My name is Bunnie Hilliard and I am the owner of Brave and Kind Books, a little bookshop in the Oakhurst neighborhood of Decatur, Georgia. We are just honored to serve the Decatur and Greater Atlanta community. We are a proudly Black-owned and woman-run business with a collection of primarily children's books and a few grown-up books aimed at helping us become better humans. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank our publisher sponsors of this panel, Orchard Books, Scholastic, and Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. Welcome again. Thank you all for joining this morning. I am super grateful to have the opportunity to present to you today and celebrate and elevate these authors and their stories. Honored would be actually an understatement to express my feelings about presenting this particular powerhouse of panel of authors today, who will be sharing their beautiful new children's titles recently released and on the way. They are inspiring, they are moving, and they paint a picture of our history and hope. Listen. Today in this New Voices, New Room Author Breakfast, we are here. We are here centering our Black and Brown community. I would imagine many of us opened our stores or got into book selling, not only because of a love of books, but even more so to create our community through storytelling. And we will continue to do that today. Each of these stories represent the truth of that statement. Speaking of we are here, we do encourage all of our booksellers to let us know that you are here and the name of your bookstore and where you're located in the chat. Again, we won't be doing an official Q&A at the end, but we will be sure to send any of your questions and comments directly to the authors. So now, without further ado, I would love to give an introduction to each of our phenomenal panel of authors. First, today we have with us Tami Charles, who will be presenting her newest picture book, We Are Here, illustrated by Bryan Collier. That will be coming in January of 2023. Tami Charles is the New York Times bestselling author of numerous books for young readers, including the picture book, All Because You Matter, and the novels Muted, Like Vanessa, and Becoming Beatriz. In her teens and her early 20s, Tami enjoyed a taste of fame as a member of an all-girl R&B trio. They performed for Boyz II Men and BET and Showtime at the Apollo. After college, Tami worked as an educator for 13 years before pursuing her childhood dream of becoming an author. We are so excited to have you with us today, Tami.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
All right. Well, I would like to say thank you again, Bunnie, and thank you to NABA and SIBA for having me here today. So we
Tami,
are here to talk about We Are Here, right?
Okay. So before you get started, Ms. Tami, I want to go ahead and introduce the rest of the authors. And
I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. We are just excited to hear all about We Are Here. Next, we are delighted to have with us Maria Hennehusa, who will be sharing her new middle grade memoir, Once I Was You, Finding My Voice and Passing the Mic, adapted for young readers from her 2020 memoir, Once I Was You, coming August 30th. A little bit about Maria. Emmy award-winning Maria Hennehusa's nearly 30-year career as a journalist includes reporting for PBS, CBS, WGBH, WNBC, CNN, NPR, and anchoring and executive producing the Peabody Award-winning show Latino USA, distributed by NPR. She has frequent appearances on NBC, and I believe as of last night, I was announced as a contributor at MSNBC. Thank you for joining us. Additionally, she's won many awards, including Emmys, the Studs Terkel Community Media Award, 2 Robert F. Kennedy Awards, and the Edward Murrow Award from the Overseas Press Club. In 2010, she founded Futuro Media, an independent nonprofit organization with the mission of producing multimedia content from a POC perspective. Through the breadth of her work and as the founding co-anchor of the political podcast In the Thick, Hinojosa has informed millions about the changing cultural and political landscape in America and abroad. She lives with her family in Harlem in New York City. Thank you for joining us today, Maria. Yes. Okay. Also today, we will have the great pleasure of hearing from Linda Sarsour. She will be sharing with us, We're in This Together, a young reader's edition of We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. That will be out this November. Linda Sarsour is a Brooklyn-born Palestinian Muslim American community organizer and mother of three. Recognized for her award-winning intersectional work, she served as national co-chair of the Women's March, helping to organize the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. She is the former executive director of the Arab American Association of New York and co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change. That's capital M, Power Change, as well as Until Freedom, a national racial justice organization working with Black and Brown communities across the country. Thank you for sharing with us today, Linda Sarsour. And last, but certainly not the least, we have with us today Paula Young Shelton and her father, Ambassador Andrew Young. They will be sharing with us Just Like Jesse Owens, a picture book by Ambassador Andrew Young as told by Paula Young Shelton. Thank you for joining us. Paula Young Shelton is an early childhood educator with nearly 30 years of experience teaching young children. She is the author of the acclaimed children's book, Child of the Civil Rights Movement, a Bank Street College of Education Best Children's Book of the Year. Paula is married with 3 sons and lives in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, Paula. And also, we are so honored to be able to have with us today Ambassador Andrew Young. We all know Ambassador Young is an American legend who was a close friend and advisor of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1972 when he was elected to Congress in Atlanta. He was the first African-American representative from the Deep South since Reconstruction to hold such a position. President Jimmy Carter appointed Andrew Young ambassador as the United States ambassador to the United Nations, where Young promoted human rights around the world. Ambassador Young served 2 terms as mayor of our hometown, Atlanta, or my hometown, Atlanta, 60 years after he saw Jesse Owens win the Olympic gold. He worked with the Black and white leadership of the city to bring the 1996 Olympic Games to Atlanta. He continues to build global equity and equality through the Andrew J. Young Foundation, which supports and promotes education, leadership, and human rights in the United States, Africa, and the Caribbean. He lives with me in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening to these amazing introductions. I am just overjoyed when I realized who this panel would be today. I had many emotions, and I'm just so excited and honored to be able to share your stories with our audience today. I would love to get started here with Paula Young Shelton and her father, Ambassador Young, and to hear all about Just Like Jesse Owens. If you'll share a bit about the book with us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Bunnie. It is such a joy to be here with booksellers. One of my favorite places to be is in a bookshop looking at children's books. So Just Like Jesse Owens is a story that my father told to us over and over again growing up. It's about his experience of seeing in his very diverse neighborhood in New Orleans, there were actually Nazi sympathizers living behind his babysitter's house down the block from him. And he saw these men hiling Hitler and, asked his father, who they were and what they were doing. And his father explained to him that they were racists, that they believed that white Christians were better than everyone else. And he also told my father that racism was a sickness, and that your job is to try to help these people, help cure them. You can't get angry with them because they're sick, but you need to try to help them. And one of the ways that you can do that is leading by example, by proving how amazing you are. And so he took my father to see Jesse Owens run in the 1936 Olympics. They had to go to a segregated movie theater. to see him on the movie reels when they would show these in the theater. And he saw Jesse Owens run in the Olympics and win 4 gold medals in front of a white supremacist. And so the lesson that he wanted my father to take, and that my father has used throughout his life, is that, you don't get mad at people for being sick. You try to help them, and you try to teach them, and you show them how amazing you are. And you can see these amazing illustrations by Gordon C. James that just really bring the story to life. But I know my father has a few words he wants to say about the book as well. Daddy?
Well, yeah, that I actually grew up in a neighborhood where I was in the middle of the block. There were other Black folk there, but they didn't have children. My brother and I were the only children. So it was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. And literally the headquarters of the Nazi Party was on the 4th corner. There were no air conditioning, so the windows were open. And so walking past, we could look in there and see them hailing Hitler and singing Deutschland über alles. And I'm 36, I was 4 years old. And this was the way my father explained it to me. And it all boiled down to the simple phrase, don't get mad, get smart. That if you get upset in a fight, you lose the fight. And stay cool. Your mind is the most powerful weapon you have. And you won't have any trouble with these people if you learn how to handle them. And I think that it not only worked for me as a 4-year-old, but it worked for me as a 40-year-old in South Africa, or in the UN when I was caught between Israeli and Palestinians, and we ended up having to negotiate the Panama Canal treaties, and all of these were somehow, from a distance, they were people that I think the State Department wanted me to fear, but they all became my friends. And I went out of my way to befriend those that I was not supposed to. And when the Chinese came to the UN, nobody knew them. And Paula's mother got disgusted and went to sit down on the couch because she was embarrassed. And then the Chinese foreign minister went over to her and said, where you find good Georgia food? And she says, only at our house. When are you coming to dinner? And so we ended up with the whole Chinese delegation eating fried chicken and ribs and corn on the cob and peas from my grandmother-in-law's garden, and drinking mint juleps. And, by midnight, we were friends. And for the entire time I was at the United Nations, I never had a veto from the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else, basically because of, I think, these elementary lessons of how to get along with people.
Absolutely. I truly also believe that telling these types of stories in this way to young people at this very early age will help them to be able to navigate these types of situations and really understand how they can help to make the world a better place. With all of the stories, Paula, that your father told you, how did you come upon telling this particular story about Jesse Owens? What inspired you to write just like Jesse Owens?
Well, it was actually, my father was in a meeting with Scholastic, talking to them about something totally different. And because my father is a natural storyteller, he just started telling this story as an example of something for them. And Andrea Pinkney, the celebrated writer and is now an editor with Scholastic, heard him tell the story. And she said, "You have to write this children's book." And my father said, "I don't write children's books, but my daughter does." And so, he passed the story on to me and really allowed me to tell it the way I remember him telling it. And, we talked about the details, and it's remarkable to me that he can remember so much from when he was 4 years old, but he has details and he has an amazing memory. And so, we talked about the story, but he really allowed me to tell it in a way that I felt would be most effective for young children. As a first grade teacher, I know what kind of stories children like to hear. And I wanted to really get that message across, that you do have to kind of open up a dialogue with everyone, that we've become so partisan in our politics and our ideas these days that we only listen to people who agree with us. And, my father's life has really been such a great example of how listening to others and talking with people who have a different perspective really does allow you to make progress. And so I'm hoping that's what this book will really inspire.
Absolutely. I read this book with my 10-year-old who he's a great reader, but we still really enjoy reading picture books together because the language is so plain. It allows us to be able to kind of open up and have conversations about the who's and the whys, and to it really is a foundation for real discussion. And so we enjoy reading this book together. Thank you so much for writing it.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And you talked a lot about all of the stories that you and your dad share and that he shares with you. Was there anything new that you learned that surprised you when you were going through the process of writing this book?
Well, I'd heard him tell the story, but in addition to getting his recollections, I also did some research on Jesse Owens and the Olympics, because I wanted to make sure that it was, also historically accurate. And just being able to learn so much more about Jesse Owens and his experience at the Olympics was really eye-opening. And I think that, he's someone who has such strength of character that, we want our children to be able to emulate, that you could go into such a hostile environment where people don't think very highly of you, where people have such a negative impression of you and, maybe even calling you names, that you can go into that environment and believe in yourself and focus on your goals and persevere and achieve what you came to achieve without allowing other people's opinions of you to really tear you down. And I think that's something that young children need to remember, is you can't let other people's opinions of you determine who you're going to be.
Absolutely. This story felt hard to read at times, obviously, because there were some things that felt very personal to me, but you were also able to write it in a way that felt very, very inspiring and very empowering. And I felt like I was able to, as a parent of a young child, translate that as something that they could hold dear and take with them. What do you think the legacy of this story can teach people, teach children, teach the grownups as well?
Well, my daddy never gave up on this story. I mean, he started at 4 years old, but when Muhammad Ali was fighting Sonny Liston, that I was probably in high school then, and he said, "Muhammad Ali is going to knock him out." And I said, "How?" I said, "Muhammad Ali he's so young, he's so thin, and Sonny Liston is a bear." He said, "Yeah, but Sonny Liston lost his temper. And Sonny Liston is going to come in there mad." And he said, "Muhammad Ali will knock him out in 3 minutes, 2 minutes." And he did. And I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "That's what happens when you lose your temper in a fight." See? And he never missed an idea. He was a dentist, and in that neighborhood, we had to run, fight, or negotiate. And I could run, but he said you wouldn't feel good about running. You can fight, and I could fight. And he always said, if you fight so that you only have one fight. Mm-hmm. And he said, hit hard, hit fast, and they won't mess with you anymore. But the idea was to keep control of any situation with your mind. And that's what that's what I wanted to say to the Black Lives Matter. Don't get mad, get smart.
That's right.
And they were very well restrained. But all of us have, and we're entitled to have a lot of pent-up hostility and resentment for the way we've been treated. But that's your problem. And that's the problem you have to deal with, because you have to be responsible. And see, in that mixed up neighborhood with Irish, Italians, and Germans, it was one thing. But then when I went to Valina C. Jones Public School, which was all Black and called a bucket of blood, I had another problem. See? But I guess I think that I was born in my ministry and in my success, that I had to be an ambassador at 4. There wasn't any problem with Jimmy Carter to make me one at 40. I'd been doing it all my life, see? Right. And all over the world. And in the civil rights movement, we never had big demonstrations without also having negotiations going on. And Dr. King would say, and they'd always put it on me. They say, Andy, don't you know some white folks in Birmingham? I said, no, I really don't. He said, you think you can get to meet some? And because he wanted a discussion. And I actually went to the Episcopal Church and talked to the director of Christian education. She introduced me to the bishop. And then I created a meeting between the bishop and Martin Luther King. And he, then the bishop of the Episcopal Church, brought all the business leaders together. And yeah, we had demonstrations almost every day. But when we weren't having demonstrations in the afternoon and evening, once or twice a week, we had meetings with different groups of business leaders to tell them what we thought they were doing wrong and how they might correct it and how we put an end to the demonstrations. But we maintained a friendship and a general courtesy, even with people who we knew didn't like us. And but it all comes back to don't get mad, get smart.
Don't get mad, get smart. I think we've all, or at least I know I have, learned so much through this book, through this conversation. I've been taking notes. I hope you all have as well, with all of these golden nuggets to keep us hopeful and inspired. Thank you for sharing your story with us today, Paula Young Shelton and Ambassador Young, just like Jesse Owens. This book is actually on shelves as of August 2nd. Is that right? All right, let's do it.
Right. It's available now.
Available now. Thank you very much.
You have to find a way to get me to your bookstore.
Oh, I will be doing that immediately.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely. Thank you very much again. Next, we would love to introduce, I'm so excited, Linda Sarsour. She's written a beautiful book entitled We're in This Together. I have that copy here. we will have her share with us, but first I just wanted to say, obviously I use my children, and I won't call them guinea pigs. The reason that we opened the store was to be able to collect stories just like the ones that we're sharing here today, and to have a place specifically to share and celebrate and elevate these stories. I felt so moved. There were many highs and lows. I felt excited. I felt empowered. I felt scared. I felt all the things. There's so much truth in this story. I'll be quiet because I'd love for you to share that with us today.
Thank you so much, Bunnie and Neba and Seba. And I am just deeply honored and humbled just to even be in this virtual space with Ambassador Young. God bless you. May God give you a long and healthy life. And thank you for all that you have done. Even for some of us who were not around at the time when you became ambassador, your work continues to inspire us today. This is, We Are in This Together is the young reader adaptation of We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders, which is my memoir. And to be quite honest, what makes me a bit different than lots of folks who are writing books is I'm not an author. It's not what I do. It's not what I want to do. I'm an organizer. I'm an activist. I lead civil disobedience. I train organizers and young new budding activists and college students around the country to build campaigns, to win campaigns, to build local power. And oftentimes find myself right in the crosshairs of very powerful opposition. And so in 2017, as you all know, I was the co-chair of the Women's March on Washington. As an organizer who was already organizing for 15 years at the time, I said, oh, I'm just going to organize another march like I always do. Like, what's the problem here? And unfortunately, or fortunately, on one side, it was the largest protest, single day protest in American history. So that was fortunate and that was great. And it brought people from all over the world together. It was kind of a high moment in my career. But for me, it was still a continuation of what I was already doing. But according to the opposition, they were quite horrified to see a Muslim American woman like me, a Palestinian American Muslim woman who just had a really powerful voice that I could resonate with people beyond the communities that I came from, that I was bold and unapologetic, and that I would speak truth to power, knowing that there would be consequences, but not caring about it. And so I was actually one day approached by a literary agent who was like following me around. And I was like, listen, lady, like, I don't have time to write books. Like, you got to leave me alone. And then finally she was like, this may be your only chance to write a book. And what she meant by that was not that, you know, she was doing me a favor, but she was caught me in a time where I was really under attack. I was getting death threats. I had law enforcement involved on every level of law enforcement. And she, even if she didn't mean this is what it reflected to me the same night that she said that to me. I said, maybe I won't be around. Maybe something will happen to me and no one will know my story. Maybe the only stories out there will be those that are framed by the opposition. So for me, my adult book was really about telling my story. It was an ode to the communities that I came from. It was an ode to all the organizers and activists that I have organized over the years. But more importantly, it was an ode to my children, that they were going to, if something were to happen to me, or even my great grandchildren, they were going to be able to pick up a book and say, this is who my grandmother was. This is who my great grandmother was. And so for me, the Young Readers Edition is an adaptation of stories. And some of the stories actually are not in my adult book. It was a way for me to write to young people and say, you got to be unapologetic. You can't let anybody define who you are. And also to reaffirm reality. Like, I don't want to tell young people that the world is great. No, the world is not great. The world's actually very bad. There's violence. There's Black and brown people being murdered at the hands of law enforcement. There are immigrants who are being deported from our country. There are wars that are happening around us. There's hate and discrimination. But also, you get to be a part of changing that. Like, you can't just sit around and say the world is bad. We actually have power, and you are powerful, and I am powerful, and you are powerful because of who you are, because everybody brings something to the table. And so I hope this book for young people is about rooting them in a reality, reaffirming for them what they see around them, because they see what's happening around them. And for me to say to them, look, I was you at one point. Somebody told me I didn't deserve to be here. Someone told me that I should hide parts of my identity because they make some people feel uncomfortable. And I'm here to tell you, I never did that. And I'm still here, and I'm still powerful, and I'm still organizing, and you got to do that too. And so that's what I hope folks get out of this book, especially young people. For me, are the solution to every problem. I believe in them, and I believe that we will have a future because of them. And so that's what I hope they get out of this book. And both covers of my book, this one, my editor was like, you go and put your face on that book, because when people walk into a bookstore, they're going to see a Muslim, powerful, poised Muslim woman on the front cover. And then as you can see here in the kind of young reader edition, it's kind of like a superhero kind of, concept. And that's what I hope for young people, and especially for young Muslim girls in America who oftentimes don't know where they belong or feel shy. I want you to know that this is you, that I am you and you are me.
Wow. What an amazing speaker you are. I think this is such a foundation for having those conversations about all of the things that we have been experiencing. My daughter is 13, and I found so many times I was able to kind of have that conversation in a way that felt like it was really planting the seeds of who she could become in this world, knowing what we have experienced. When you began to write this book, what age, a grade of a reader did you have in mind? Translating some of those really momentous occasions, protests, murders, all of the things that have happened in our lives since 2020 and before. How did you decide which stories you would tell, and to which age and grade reader did you have in mind?
I had kind of 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th graders, kind of young people that were like about to leave elementary school to go into middle school. I think a lot of young reader books or young adult books kind of speak to more like teenagers or maybe even like a bit of early college. And I was like, you got to get them young. I think we don't oftentimes talk to young people around ages 9, 10, 11 in a way that's serious and makes them feel like we're treating them like serious human beings, that they too can understand trauma, and they too can understand grief, and they too can understand pain, because they experience it too. And they live around adults who are experiencing so many different things, whether it's illness or poverty or, just kind of the world that is around them. And so I wanted to talk to them in a way that, yes, reaffirmed that pain and grief and trauma and racism and hatred and bigotry is real, but there's also moments of solidarity, and that we are in this together. And to let, if there's a young little Black girl reading this, that I hope she comes out and says, my liberation is bound up with this little Palestinian Muslim girl, and my liberation is bound up with this Asian American girl over here, and this Latina girl down here in Texas. And that's the kind of feeling that I want young people to get out. Like, look, bad things are happening, but guess what? We're all we got, and we're all we need, and we are in this together. And that's the balance you have of talking to young people. So you're not giving them feelings of despair and saying, this is just how it is. No, this is how it is. But guess what? You and me together, we're going to make change happen. And this book shares stories of success. When I got up one day and I'm going to organize, I shared stories about my daughter, who was only 8 years old when she stood up at a mayoral candidate forum. And she said, when you become mayor of New York City, will you include Muslim holidays in our New York City public school calendar? We are over 100,000 students here in the New York City public school system. We want to be recognized. She was 8 years old. And it was phenomenal to watch this on the record, where every mayoral candidate said, I'm going to do that, because they were put on the spot by a young person that basically said to them, don't let me choose between my faith and my education. And in 2015, long and behold, Mayor Bill de Blasio came to my community, to a school right up the street from my office, and announced that New York City will be the largest public school system in America that is going to recognize our Muslim students and our Muslim teachers. And that was an example. And now till today, 1.1 million students are home for this holiday. And they know that they're home because they are celebrating a holiday that is celebrated by their Muslim fellow students. And so these wins along the way, some of them were around policing, and getting young people to see that they too could be involved, that they too can be part of the work that we do. And I think this book gives them some skills. It also gives them vocabulary. I think oftentimes young people want to express themselves, but don't always have the right vocabulary to talk about these issues.
Absolutely. I had a question, or I did some reading, and I found out that your initial plan was to become an English teacher. We should all be so lucky to have you as an English teacher for ourselves or for our children. If you were teaching this, what would you want your students to take away from this reading?
What I will say, Bunnie, is that God, you plan and God plans. So my son now is a New York City public school teacher and a member of the United Federation of Teachers as a high school English teacher.
Wow.
Because that's how, it's still here and I still have it around me. And so I'm excited to say that my son has taken on my dream and is now a master's student at Pace University, getting his master's in education. So I feel like I'm going to live vicariously through my son here in the New York City public school system. For me, if I was if I was still a high school teacher, and I'm excited to have many people in my family here in New York City who are teachers, I'm in our wonderful public education system, is that this is a great book to really get young people on a journey, number one, to figure out how to share their own stories. There's a lot of stories in here about me growing up as a daughter of immigrants that resonates with a lot of children who grew up as children of immigrants, and being able to say, what were things in your upbringing? What were things that your parents did? What were stories of your grandparents that kind of made you who you are today? I feel like oftentimes in the American education system, there's a lot of teaching at young people versus allowing young people to figure out what are the things in their life that teach them to be who they are today. Although I do give a lot of gratitude to my public school teachers for helping me decide kind of my path forward and encouraging me. And I do write about those teachers in the public education system that I went through here in New York City. But there were reasons why I am who I am today because of my immigrant mom, who English was her second language. I was because of my father, who was a small business owner, a bodega owner, which a lot of people connect to, a lot of bodegas all over the country where you could connect to that, older guy who's the owner of your local bodega. That was my dad. And my dad was someone who taught me a lot just from hanging out at the bodega. I saw how my dad treated folks that were in the community. My dad was this, fair-skinned Palestinian Muslim guy who was in a community for close to 40 years, in a predominantly Black community with some, Caribbean and some Puerto Ricans. And the young people saw my father as their father, grandfather. When their parents were working 2-3 jobs, my dad was the one that gave them whatever groceries they need, and then had this composition notebook where he would write $11, and then their mom would pay whenever their mom could pay, because that was just the kind of community that my father wanted to build. My father understood that we were living in Brooklyn because of his customers, that they were the reason why we were able to pay our mortgage and we were able to be. And so my dad, there was a story in my book that I share about a little boy. I was standing at the cash register. A little boy came in and shoplifted from my dad. So he was a little kid. He was probably the same age of kids that will be reading this book. Came in and he shoplifted something that was 50 cents. And my dad, saw him in the mirror, called him over and said, "What are you doing?" Mm-hmm. And he was shocked that my dad caught him. And my dad was like, "What?" He said, "Your mom works hard. Mm-hmm. Your mom is working for you every day." She's like, "You don't do this." He's like, "What?" And the kid said, "I'm hungry and my mom is not home right now." My dad was like, "Well, then here." And he asked me for a paper bag. I gave him the paper bag. He puts in this like little cake and this little drink that he took. And he said, "Don't you ever do that again. You know that if your mom found out that you did this, if you are ever hungry, you come in here, you ask me for what you want and you go." And I thought about it, now that I reflect on it so many years later, like, if he was a little older, my dad would have called the cops and said, "Here's a shoplifter." And then here comes a kid that could ruin the rest of his life over something that, no one decides to think about why people do the things that they do. And my dad taught me a lot about also being a young woman. A lot of times people will say women are, for me, my dad was the one that was like, you go to college, you be what you want to be, you do you, as an Arab man who comes from a very patriarchal society. And so I was able to kind of demystify some stereotypes that, that I am the strong woman that I am today, of course, because of my mother, but also I had a father who was the father of 5 daughters, who always never treated us differently than anyone else. And so there's different moments that I think are going to resonate with these young people. And as a teacher, being able to use this story to say, is there something that has happened to you in your life that you see in this book, that shaped who you are today, and getting our young people to start thinking from that perspective versus letting everyone tell you what needs to be the thing that teaches you how to be who you are. But in fact, there are the things that make you who you are already there. You just have to learn how to reflect on them.
That's right. Amen. All right. What's next for Linda Sarsour?
Bunnie, every year I ask myself the same question because I'm always like, you go from one election, I'm like, Donald Trump's not the president. I might have a little vacation over here, go do something myself, go do some pottery and something. And then just the world is worse and worse every day. I also do have a picture book coming out. I haven't started writing it at all. I don't know what it's called yet, but it's definitely coming out in sometime in 2023. And again, I just want to get to that younger kind of audience. Like I want a little kid, who's, 5 years old, 4 years old, to pick up a book that, also reflects my story, and which I think is an extension of my communities. I'm an organizer. I just came out of a great week this week. I was in Louisville, Kentucky. Many of you have heard 4 police officers have now been charged in relation to the murder of Breonna Taylor. This is a case that I lived and breathed for the last 2.5 years. I was not going to give up on Breonna Taylor, and I'm still not going to give up. You will see me at courtrooms once these trials start. We will continue to organize and make sure that these men are held accountable for the murder of Breonna Taylor. I'm working on so many cases. Tanisha Chappelle, who was murdered in the hands of the Jackson County Jail in Indiana. Many of you know in Georgia right now, we're working on a case around a woman named Breonna Greer, who also died in the custody of a Georgia Police Department, Pamela Turner in Texas. So, unfortunately, I'm, part of a team that's kind of like, we're like the ambulance. We're going to triage and we're going to stand for families, many of whom a lot of Americans haven't heard of, but they will get some sort of accountability because people deserve that. So if that's what I got to do for the rest of my life, then that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to continue to speak truth to power. And I'm going to continue to not be afraid. I'm going to continue to take whatever hits I get, because I know one day it's going to be worth it. And I know Ambassador Young knows this. People now are, inspired by the Ambassador Youngs, and people will tell these kind of, glorifying stories of Dr. King and Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and Rosa Parks and Ida B. and many, many, many more. But 55, 60 years ago, those were not the stories that were told. In fact, the stories were the opposite. These were the villains. These were the ungrateful Americans. These were the anti-Americans. These are the people that were, quote, making trouble, that we are being divisive. And that's who I am right now in 2022. And so I hope maybe in 2070, somebody's going to be like, you know what, maybe that lady wasn't that so bad. Maybe she was actually doing some stuff that really needed to be done at that time. So I'm hoping that I'm still alive like Ambassador Young when I'm into my 60s and 70s and get to hear that I probably wasn't the worst person in the world. I was really someone that was dedicated to equity and justice for all. Absolutely.
Thank you. You wrote in this, I read in this book where when you wrote it, that no one had been charged in the killing of Breonna Taylor. And so to have that happen feels really full circle as a reader. And thank you for all that you are doing in the world. Definitely truth to power here and power to the truth. Thank you for writing and for sharing the story with us today. Great. Whew. Lots of greatness. Next, we will have Tami Charles, who has written a book entitled, appropriately for today, We Are Here, a picture book for young readers. Tami, we are delighted to have you with us, and we are waiting for you, excited to have you share with us your story today.
Hello. My apologies for getting ahead of myself earlier. I was just so excited. I totally forgot about the order. Sorry about that, guys.
You know what, though? I think we talked about that, and when we were all, you and I
we
both
did, and I forgot.
For technical difficulties, or I know I was.
Too much running around. In fact, I'm outside right now taking this Zoom.
Your lighting is
it's
beautiful.
raining. It's raining.
Oh wow.
It's just now starting to rain. So this is how we're going to do this, in the rain. Okay, let's get started. We are here. I did have some slides. I don't know if they're up, and maybe I just can't see the first one. Here it comes.
There we go.
Okay. So once again, I would just like to say thank you for having me. Oh, it is raining. Wow. All right. So we are here. This is my forthcoming picture book with Bryan Collier, who's amazing. But before I talk about We Are Here, I really can't talk about We Are Here without first shining a light on its predecessor, the book that came before this one. And that book is All Because You Matter. All Because You Matter is a love letter that I wrote specifically for my son, though it turned into something of a much larger conversation, for which I'm very grateful. I wrote it at a time when he had questions about the world and about life and questions about injustice. Namely, when he learned about Dr. King in kindergarten, one of the things that he just could not get over was, if Dr. King was such a good person who was trying to do something so good and so beneficial for all of us, why is it that the bad guys hurt him? So I knew even at this young age that he had these questions about life, and that I realized, I need to really say a lot. And I knew I had more to say. Even after the book was published, 2020 came along, and I called it the year of the reckoning. It felt like we had not one, but like two pandemics happening in tandem. We had COVID, which really threw our household into a tailspin. Shifting to virtual school was a challenge. And then we had this other hateful disease of racism that really has not gone away, but it just seems so much more amplified with 2020, especially with the killing of George Floyd, the hate against Asian Americans. And that's when I realized I truly was not done, because my son, he saw the video. By this point, he was a little older, definitely a lot more vocal. He read the headlines and he had questions. And those questions got me thinking. As you see on this slide, those are some pictures of myself as a baby. I'm a mom first, before I'm an author, and being a mom is one of the greatest jobs. But it is not an easy job. And the journey to becoming a mom is not always easy. Years ago, I went through some pretty bad fertility problems. And I wanted so desperately to have a daughter, and I would have, but she did not make it. Her name was Grace. And I remember during this specific time, during 2020, when all of this was happening with the reckoning and the state of our world, and seeing these headlines that my son saw, which produced more questions, it got me thinking, had my daughter made it to the other side, had she been here on earth with me, eager for understanding, how would I have answered her in a time like 2020 when she had questions? What would I have said? And that's when I realized, well, I wanted to write something for my unborn child, for all children like her, who she would have been. The wonder of who she could have been has always been at the forefront, especially for this book. So I wanted to write a celebration. I wanted to write something for her to remind her of the legacy of greatness from which she comes. I wanted to let my daughter know, and all children like her know, that she is brilliant. She is extraordinary and far beyond ordinary. No matter what the headlines show, no matter the injustice that these kids are witnessing in real time, We Are Here is for Grace. It's for the joy and the wonder of who she could have been. And yet this book is for everyone, because it is a loving reminder of the contributions that Black and Brown communities have made across space and time, and why we all should revel in these contributions, why we should celebrate and benefit from those achievements. So I'll wrap it up by saying that All Because You Matter was this book that I wrote for my son that turned into something that really resonated with readers of all ages and readers of all backgrounds. All Because You Matter is an affirmation of worth and of love. We Are Here is a celebration of Black and Brown excellence across space and time. But even when I wrote book 2, which is We Are Here, I knew that I still wasn't done. I realized I still had more to say. And one of the things that I noticed in 2020 was that when people especially chanted that Black Lives Matter, you had a section of society who would call back with, well, all lives matter. Well, do all lives matter? Yes, of course, all lives matter. However, especially in 2020, I just felt like all lives can't matter if Black and brown ones don't. If those from communities who are marginalized and oppressed don't. So that got me thinking, I needed to end this trilogy of sorts with a pretty little bow, something that affirms that, yes, we all do matter, but it cannot happen if we do not unite together. And my goal and my hope for this series is that by the time all 3 books are published, you will notice that the spines of all 3 books create one complete sentence. All because you matter, we are here, united together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd love to ask, as I read this book, I noticed that We Are Here encompasses many facets of the extraordinary legacy of Black people, music and science and innovation among them. What role do you think that this plays in the narrative?
Oh boy. Well, that's quite a question.
Yeah.
I really, with this book, We Are Here, I wanted the whole world to know that we are here. We have always been here. We're not going anywhere.
That's right.
All of these things, there are so many things in this world that people from all backgrounds have benefited from. Inventions, music, food, style. A lot of those moments where our people have created for everyone to enjoy, for everyone to learn from. That was the narrative that I wanted to push.
Right.
I wanted to push that, you know what? Yes, we may have gone through oppression. We still are, but we have stories. We ignite joy that you get to benefit from.
Yes.
And I want readers to know that if my daughter had been here, I would have been pushing this, but she's not here. So I'm going to push that message for all of the other Graces in the world and those who are like her. But not even just for little Black and brown kids, all readers should know the role that we have played in society, and that we have our stories and we have our contributions. And for that, we are to be acknowledged for it and respected because of it.
Right. And we all benefit from it.
We all do. Yeah.
So what is next for you and Bryan Collier? You mentioned the 3rd book in the series. Are you able to share a bit more about that with us today?
So yes, when I came up with this idea, I knew that last book had to be all encompassing. I wanted to, book 1 is kind of like paying homage to my son, Christopher. Book 2 is paying homage to Grace, girls like Grace. But book 3, I wanted to see everybody. I told Bryan, I told the whole Scholastic team, like, book 3 is going to be the bow, the period at the end of a sentence. So in book 3, you will see, I hope, I haven't seen any art, so I'm going to put this out there. Hopefully the message can get back to Bryan. I would love for book 3 to feature some of those gorgeous kids that he drew in books 1 and 2. Book 1 is actually my son on the cover, which is really cool. He's been immortalized in picture books now. But I would love to see some of those same kids in book 3, but like a real rainbow of kids of all faiths, colors, backgrounds, and abilities coming together, uniting together. Because if I'm being honest, I don't think we're going to do it. I think it's going to be the kids that save us all.
Yeah,
So I really want book 3 to be this, embodiment of unity. I remember the song "We Are the World," Michael Jackson.
Yep.
It's that in a book.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. Listen, audience, I was told that we could take some liberty with the time here today. I know the next panel doesn't start until 10:30. And so we are super honored again, moreover, to have and to share with you today, Maria Hennehusa. The last of the stories that we'll be sharing with you today, Once I Was You, Finding My Voice and Passing the Mic. Such a vibrant story. I enjoyed reading it so much. I could not put it down. I thought, oh, I have to read all of these books. I won't be able to read them all, but I was sure to finish this one. I enjoyed your story so much. Thank you for sharing it. If you could tell our audience today about this new title.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Bunnie. And what an honor to be here with Tam. Linda, who's my sister. Love you from Harlem. Paula, didn't know you, now I do. But seriously, to be on a call with Ambassador Young, I'm just pinch me. Ambassador Young, thank you for all you've done and for being such a great example, really. Wow. So I think the message here, right, is that what we are trying to do is to get to the next generation. And I think it was Linda who said, you decided not to write for 15 or 16-year-olds, which was when I was asked to write a young reader's book. I was like, well, I mean, 15 or 16-year-olds. When we finally realized that what we were going to do was to write as Linda, this is the adult version of Once I Was You, but then coming out on August 30th is the young reader's version of Once I Was You. And we changed the subtitle. It's called Finding My Voice and Passing the Mic. And it is also a little bit superhero like Linda, because I think that's part of what we're trying to say is that you can be a superhero. And the message, I mean, when my agent asked me, think about a young reader's book, I was like, I don't write for young readers. And then I thought about the little girl who I dedicated my adult version, right? The opening story is a moment when I'm in an airport in McAllen, Texas, and I was a witness to the trafficking of children by the US government. This is when, and it continues to happen, children taken away from their parents, now we know, intentionally to create havoc. And when I witnessed that and was able to speak to one of the little girls and I write about her, the decision to write this book, thinking of a 10-year-old refugee, immigrant, of any background, because all of us here on this call could be that. We are that. Linda and I are immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself, child of immigrants. And so I wanted them to be seen. I wanted that little girl whose memory was that she was being moved around in the United States without papers, without knowing where she was going, where she was being taken, and that she wasn't even allowed to speak to a journalist. So I thought that's why I want to read this book. It is written for about 10-year-olds. And I love the fact that as a writer, it really challenged me to become a 10-year-old and to tell the stories through the perspective of a 10-year-old. And as a writer, that was really, really exciting. But I have to say, given where Bunnie is based at, Georgia, where the conference is so much about these particular areas. So we write these books with heart, but we also understand that there's the bigger intention. This is also about a market, right? Selling books, buying books. We understand that. Right now, we know that Latinos and Latinas, the median age of Latinos and Latinas in the United States is 10 years old. We know that 1 out of every 4 kindergartners now is Latino or Latina. We know that because in the last census from 2010 to the year 2020, the Latino population, not migrants and refugees, the in-birth here, accounted for 50%, a total of half of the total US population growth. of the United States. Latinos and Latinas represent the second largest voting cohort in the United States. And so I'm a journalist, but I'm also formed by Martin Luther King as a little girl watching him and Ambassador Young, right? They were the ones who told me I belonged in this country. It was deeply political because I was then not an American citizen. And so the message is that we have to own our voice in this country. And we are a powerhouse in this country, which is why I never use the word minority in any of my journalism, in any of the work that we do. By the way, I'm just going to humble brag. We just won a Pulitzer Prize for the podcast Suave. So all of this work that we do is aimed at empowering, which is what every author here is about. So I'm just really honored to be on this panel and understanding that what we're doing is trying to change lives in the future, the way my life was changed by Martin Luther King, and then seeing Ambassador Young with all of the dedication that he gave. And frankly, my life was changed by Linda Sarsour, somebody younger than me, but who has impacted my life so deeply. So it's great to be with all of you here on this call.
Thank you. So you mentioned that this is an adaptation from your first book, Once I Was You. What was your process for finding your voice, and how did you choose the stories to tell and to translate for these young readers?
So very honestly, if you read Once I Was You, you know that I actually wanted to be an actress. It came true. I was in the movie In the Heights. I had a little tiny role, but as an actress, I always look for ways in which I can use this craft. And so writing this book, actually, I became an actor. I was like, okay, you're 10 years old. This is how, I can't even explain it, but I would wake up in the mornings and I'd be just like, okay, so you're 10 and you're talking to fellow 10-year-olds and you're telling them these stories. And I have an amazing personal editor. Her name is Katie Salisbury. And she helped me with the original outline. And so we had all of the stories already there. We went and picked and chose and then added and kind of rounded it out. And also we slimmed things. And I'll just say that, one of my inspirations for deciding to go ahead and write this book was Stamped, the young readers version, because by Jason Reynolds, because I think it's just really aimed at this hip new generation that wants to see themselves reflected in these books.
Absolutely. I did feel when reading it that it did resonate with me and with young readers that same way. The way that you were able to tell the stories were vibrant, they were powerful, they were relatable, and really resonated with young people. I mean, I'm not a young person, but I could still, it took me back to those times in my life when I was younger, when I was experiencing kind of a lot of the things that you experience socially as you're trying to develop your identity during that time, as in the middle school years. You introduced themes of privilege, of class, of personal identity, and cultural negation in this book. Some of those topics that may feel more difficult to discuss, but you just press right on and hit those buttons. What were your thoughts about discussing, or how you discuss some of these more serious topics with middle schoolers at this time?
I just kind of deal in transparency and honesty. I think it was Linda who said the world is a difficult place. It is hard. I'm Mexican, so I have 16 jobs. I can never say no to work. So one of the other things that I do is I'm a college professor, and I'm very clear with my students that, don't have the illusion that there's going to come a moment when it is all in nirvana, right? We are all constantly struggling. And the work that we're doing is to create a better world and a better country, very specifically. So it was all about using stories that were going to be, I think, like we all understand, teaching moments. I talk about this thing about planting seeds, and that young people need to kind of be aware of the seeds that are being planted. For example, I end up understanding that I'm a journalist dedicated to covering the issue of immigration, when in the process of writing this book, and then of course I included here, it's revealed to me, right, that I was almost taken by an immigration agent myself. I arrived with privilege in an airport with a green card. My father was a medical doctor at the University of Chicago, and still the immigration agent attempted to take me from my mother at the Dallas airport. And when I understood that, that's when I realized, like, oh, now I know exactly why I do what I do. And so I wanted young people to understand that there are these things that happen, these seeds that are planted, like the stories that Ambassador Young have told, that will in fact give us these roots. And by the way, Ambassador Young, you're not going to believe this, or maybe you will. I met Jesse Owens. My parents' best friends in the whole world were a couple from Mississippi, Rosa and Jerry Morgan, who were part of the Great Migration North into Chicago. And they were the ones who really educated my parents on the civil rights movement. And they were very much in the civil rights movement in Chicago. And so Jesse Owens was their friend. And I was a little kid running around parties, pool parties, block parties, you know, with all the collard greens and the fried chicken and all of that. And there was Jesse Owens, and I just run up to him and give him a hug. And so I just love that there's a kind of full circle that's happening here.
Wow. I think all of us are picking our jaws up from all of the things that we've been able to hear and experience and learn through this panel today. Not what we were expecting, but what we have been blessed with. One last question for you, Maria, if you don't mind, as we wrap up today. You mentioned that your books, and I believe that all of these books, are planting seeds in the minds of our young people, and telling these stories in a way that will resonate with them and hopefully produce the humans that we're all trying to raise, and that we, I think as a consensus believe, will be the ones who save us. What messages specifically do you want Black and Brown readers to come away with this book and everyone as a whole?
I don't know. I guess because I'm the wrap-up speaker, you know, I really feel like it's about seeing ourselves in each other. I mean, that's why the book title, Once I Was You, right? So I think the message is, I am you, you are me. We find commonality in this country. None of us are going anywhere. One of my catchphrases for my podcast, Latino USA, is no te vayas, don't leave, because we're not leaving. And the thing is that in the democracy, you have to claim your voice and you have to claim your power. And we can't move in fear. So much of what's happening is images of fear about people like me. Donald Trump built his entire campaign about Mexican immigrants just like me, or the fear about a Muslim woman who is just like me, or a Black woman. This is so. What we are saying is we are each other, we see ourselves in each other, but we're also going to own our individual voices and own our power, because that is what the essence of what a democracy is. So it's all about owning our power. That's why the subtitle is Owning Your Power, Owning My Power and Passing the Mic. And may there be many, many, many young journalists and activists and ambassadors and writers who come as a result of reading of these books.
Absolutely. Thank you. What a perfect way to wrap up this panel today. We've learned so much. We're really excited about the stories that you all have written. Thank you for sharing them. They belong at every school and home library, and I'm excited about the legacy that you all have written and will leave with us today. Thank you, audience, for joining us once again, and thank you for your time. And we will make sure that any comments and questions get to the authors. And that's it. That's all we got today, guys.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.